Today I'm going to talk about going beyond chatbots and how do we take at our company, how do we build real-time collaborative multimodal agents, and how do we use Flutter to do it. So I own a company called Timu, and we've been investing heavily in AI agents, and we've been longtime Flutter users. So we build a platform that allows people to ship voice bots, let them do document authoring, computer use, code gen, media gen, mail bots, multiplayer chat bots, AI powered workflows, RAG, and real time sync. Um, so I think one of the things that often people haven't seen a lot is agents that are a bit more proactive. Like people are used to going to ChatGPT and saying, "Hey, can you do this for me?" And ChatGPT doesn't really have a strong opinion about uh, whether it should do it. Just does what you say. And I think one of the things that people need to move to is agents that can really have enough context and opinion to help you and guide you through a process, um, and maybe correct your course before a disaster happens. So here we have an example of an agent that we built for teachers to help manage their classroom. And one of the things that often happens in elementary schools is kids have allergies, and it's really easy for a teacher to bring a snack that ends up with a kid going to the hospital. And so here we have an example of an agent that the teacher asks if she can bring some strawberry shortcake to class, and the agent comes back and says, "Hey, I don't think bringing strawberry shortcake would be a good idea." And then it can follow up and suggest a new recipe that takes all the allergies of the kids in the classroom into account to prevent that elementary school from kind of getting in a situation where they have a lawsuit. Um, Often, other times you see, like anyone that's ever interacted with ChatGPT, and you ask it to create some content for you. Maybe you use ChatGPT's Canvas. You often end up in a situation where, out of the box, ChatGPT is really good at a first draft, but it kind of sucks at a second draft. And so, one of the things that we do with our agents is we allow people to build agents that know how to manipulate documents more like Google Docs, so that when you have a agent go out, and in this case, we're going to have an agent write a lesson plan, and one of the issues, of course, when you're working with ChatGPT is you want ChatGPT to write this document and maybe puts it in Canvas, and then you ask for a minor change, and it rewrites the whole freaking document. And so you end up in this situation where you're not really moving forward. And so one of the things we've done is developed a multiplayer sync framework so that the agents can manipulate these documents with discrete operations that then get synchronized with all the participants, kind of like Google Docs works. So that what your agent can do is it can actually manipulate the document. If you say, "Hey, I want to change the title," it knows how to go in and just change the title instead of blasting out a whole new document. In this case here, I'm going to say I don't like the shapes and colors storybook, and ask it to manipulate that document to remove it, and it will go and it's going to change that document. Now, one of the cool things that we do here is that from the agent standpoint, all it does is manipulate the document, and the user automatically receives those changes. So there's not a lot of kind of complex coordination between the agent and the end user. Behind the scenes, we're using CRDTs, so it makes it really easy to, from the user perspective, they're manipulating a local document. From the agent's perspective, they're manipulating a local document, and all this synchronization, all the stuff with protocol is hidden behind the scenes. So another thing that comes up often when people are building agents is that you really need to come up with a way to produce kind of just-in-time interface. So you're probably used to building Flutter apps where you work with the designer and you kind of dial in a dialogue. And then after you dial in the dialogue, you go through a process where you start refining the text in your dialogue. And one of the things that you run into with agents is that um, if agents are really going to be autonomous, they need to be able to generate tools specific for the problem that they're trying to solve. And so often you can't really just bake in the dialogue ahead of time. At runtime, the agent needs the ability to create dynamic interface. And so in this example, we have a chatbot that is configured with some tools that allow it to dynamically present interface to the user. And in this case, this dialogue here doesn't exist in our Flutter code, which is really important because if we were to try to hard code every possible dialogue that the agent could show as a tool, your agent is not it's not very dynamic. It's really rigid, and it can't ask users for exactly what you need. Another thing that comes up often is that everyone's used to seeing chatbots, but agents could do so much more than just give you text back. And so here we have an example in our same agent that we built for managing classrooms, where a teacher can work with the agent to generate assets that they can then use in the classroom. So in this case, the agent's going to go out. I'm going to say, hey, could you make me a coloring book? And the agent's going to work with OpenAI. It's going to go out, use the image gen API, and it's going to create a dynamic worksheet tailored specifically for this classroom experience. And so one of the cool things here is that often teachers are in a situation where they buy assets from a company, and those assets are not really customizable. They're static baked again. And with agents, you really want to have the ability to create things on the fly and to give people the ability to dynamically change their assets. So here we're going to see the agent's talking to ChatGPT, and after a bit, we're going to get a worksheet generated for the class. So behind the scenes, this is using OpenAI's new GPT-1 image model, which it kind of went viral for all their giblification. Give it a second here. Does take a minute. All right, there we go. We got our worksheet. Our shapes and colors worksheet. So I think another thing that comes up is a lot of times teams are stuck in this process where you get done with your app and now you got to go through localization. You got to spend a lot of time translating all of your dialogues, all of your text in your app. And one of the nice things when you start integrating agents with your process is that language is now a user preference. You don't really have to have these complicated processes where you're translating everything in your app. Of course, this requires you to have the ability to dynamically present and generate UI. But assuming you have that, then you get to a situation where, in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask the agent, like, hey, from now on, could you speak to me in Spanish? And, a lot of people have seen this in the context of just a chatbot, maybe, in ChatGPT here, like this, text is coming out in Spanish. But the nice thing about this is that when you give an agent tools to create dynamic user interface, it can also do things like apply to dialogues and interface within your app. And so in this case, I've said, hey, can you talk to me in Spanish from now on? I don't really speak Spanish, so I asked it in English anyway. And here you see now the dialogue, which again does not exist anywhere in our code, is presented in the natural language of the speaker. So let's say you're building an app and you need to support many, many different languages. Agents can really help you not to have to do a lot of this busy work. So Another thing that we do is, a lot of times people have a desire to do more than just a chatbot. They want to do something like, ultimately everyone's trying to get to this Tony Stark experience where you can actually talk to Jarvis. And so in this case, this is an example of a voice bot built with Flutter. Doesn't seem like we got the audio coming through.
The incident has been logged. Since Zoe scraped her knee, this is a level 2 incident. Clean the wound, apply a band-aid, and comfort her. Be sure to document the incident, notify her parent at pickup, and provide a copy of the report. Let me know if you need help with the incident.
So there's a voice bot. This behind the scenes is using WebRTC and OpenAI for the speech to text and the text to speech. Another thing that's interesting about apps is not everything has an API. And so often you get into a situation where your agents need to accomplish a task and you don't have an API to do it. And if you don't have an API to do it, how do you give your agent the tools to go and fetch that information for you? So in this example, we have an agent that is going to interact with a web browser to dynamically go and find out about some sessions at Fluttercon. And of course, Fluttercon doesn't have an API, at least if they do, I don't know about it. And so I'm going to ask, hey, can you go out to Fluttercon site and let me know what time that that I'm speaking. Now I have 2 sessions, of course, this session and the AI roundtable. We'll see it's going to load up a web browser and the screens are going to be remoted. And in real time, we're going to see this agent using Flutter plus OpenAI's computer use preview model to browse the session and find out when one of my talks is. So computer use is a little bit slow, something to keep in mind. It's typically not good for scenarios where maybe just a Google search would suffice. But for a lot of processes that are running on the back end that you don't really care about the latency, computer use models can be a great way to give your agent the ability to interact with existing systems without needing to build an entire API. Because if humans can do it, a computer agent and a browser agent can do it. So in this case, it goes out, it scrolls around on the page, it interacts with the page, and it finds out, hey, my session is it pulled out the AI roundtable. So how we do it? We use Flutter a lot. One of the things about Flutter that's great is I think Flutter gives you the most bang for your buck. I mean, you could go out and you can build agents with Python, which we do a lot. You could go and you could build your UI with React Native. But one of the problems you find if you go down that React Native path is that often you end up having to fork your app. You'll have a web app that's React, and then you'll have a totally separate app that's React Native. And you can see this, for example, with OpenAI. OpenAI doesn't have a lot of features in the mobile app. They're available on the web because they've invested heavily in web-specific technology. You saw the same thing with Google has the Notebook LM team. They built on web tech. But of course, the very first feature request they had from users was, would you give us a mobile app? And what did they use to build it? They used Flutter to build it. So I think in terms of bang for the buck, you can't beat Flutter. It may have some ruffles around the edges, but the fact that you can kind of get up and running, we heavily use Flutter Web. I think we're one of the weird people in that regard. But once we have everything working on web, it almost automatically works on mobile, and that's awesome. Now, we also heavily use OpenAI. I'm not a big fan of Gemini or Anthropic. I believe that OpenAI, there's a reason everyone's building on top of it. They have by far the best developer tools and platform for building AI-powered applications. And now we heavily use Python, and I think this is the reality of building agents with Flutter. There's only so much you can do in the client. And I'll talk a little bit about that later. So we love open source. Here are some of the things that we use to do this. We are using Supabase, which is a awesome database. We mainly just use it for auth though, because it has a great auth package out of the box. For analytics, we use ClickHouse, which is, you'll see this is very common with a lot of AI companies. ClickHouse is an awesome data warehouse that, when you're building agents, often you're in a situation where you need a lot of observability data, and ClickHouse is a great way to store it. In all of our kind of virtual rooms that we create for AI agents, we also use LanceDB. LanceDB is really cool because it's a headless database that you can run. And I'm sure a lot of people have maybe heard of Snowflake, but LanceDB is a little less known. It's an open source project. It's used by companies like Harvey. If you've heard of Harvey, they're doing a ton of stuff in legal and AI. And it gives you the ability to run these headless databases that do vector search and hybrid search. And you don't really need any infrastructure because they're just reading and writing straight to the cloud buckets. They almost have infinite scale for reads in that regard because there's nothing. It's just the bucket. There are some limitations on write, but for a lot of AI workloads like RAG, that's not really a problem. We heavily use Kubernetes, and I think this is just one of the sad truths about building AI agents. The current primitives in the clouds don't really map to what you need for a lot of AI agents. A lot of that has to do with the fact they're stateless, but a lot of these things like serverless functions are not really designed for stateful workflows. For audio and video agents, we can build agents that you can talk to. We can build agents that can kind of see what's in your camera. And a lot of that infrastructure is provided by LiveKit. LiveKit's the same company. If you go into OpenAI to their advanced voice mode, LiveKit powers the whole experience. So LiveKit is great. It's also open source. They do have a cloud hosted platform, which for many people actually costs less than running it yourself. But these are some awesome open source projects. In terms of Flutter components, here's some awesome Flutter components that we use. ShadCN UI, I'm a real big fan of. Not a big fan of Material. Super Clipboard, awesome package. I think anyone that's ever shipped a desktop app or web app has probably used Super Clipboard. Re-Editor, I think is a less commonly known one, but Re-Editor is an awesome syntax and code highlighting editor. Highly recommended. Graphic for, in our dashboards, we have we give people the ability to monitor what their agents are doing, to see their token consumption, to see their, the latency on their tool calls. And so, of course, we need reports. And for that, we've turned to the graphic package in Flutter, which is awesome for reporting. The learning curve's a little steep. The documentation's not great, but we love this package, and I think it's the best Flutter charting package personally. PDFRX for rendering PDF documents. Often you have agents that need to interact with documents, and we use PDFRX for that. Flutter WebRTC we use for a lot of our audio and visual communication. That's a great package. I've contributed to it. It's maintained by the LiveKit team. And then, of course, one of the things we do is, because we give the people the ability to create these kind of collaborative document editing agents, we do lean on Super Editor for that. So with our platform, you can kind of you create these Google Docs type experiences. And my opinion, Super Editor is the best rich text editor package in Flutter. I've also in the past heavily used Flutter Quill, but if you need more of a framework for building an editor, Super Editor is a lot better than Quill. If you need just an editor that kind of works out of the box, and maybe you have a web client that is already using Quill, Quill can be a great choice there. But I think for anytime you want to do something a little more low level, Super Editor is a great place to turn. So some principles. I think one of the things that is very different with agents as opposed to traditional applications is, as soon as you add an agent to your application, it's now a multiplayer app. And a lot of people aren't used to building applications that are collaborative and real time. A lot of people are used to, you build your Flutter app, you hit the submit button, and then if you want to see someone else's changes, you got to refresh. And I think with agents, the reality is that they often end up running in a different process. And so you instantly are in a situation where you need a way that when your agent is working out on the server, people can see its results in the client. Um, and so I think if you start going down the pathway of building agents, one of the very first things you need to do is make sure you have a good solution to that problem. Make sure whether you're using something like our platform, or you're using something like Supabase, or using something like Firebase. It's essential that you have some kind of technology that you either build or buy that allows you to synchronize state between multiple processes. Um, I think it's also very important that agents can do more than just be a chatbot. That people can interact with them via voice. That people can have them generate documents, and it's really important when you're thinking about agents to think less about the chat experience and more about different capabilities like tools and media that you can give your agents. Um, Another thing is, I really truly believe agents need to be cross-platform by default. We're in an environment where development teams are shrinking. We're in an environment where you have to move fast, and it's really hard to do that if you're maintaining multiple different versions of your agents. And so, as it relates to Flutter, like I said, I don't think that you can really afford to waste time on doing multiple implementations anymore. It's better to start off from day one, use something cross-platform. If at some point you want to create a native app, go ahead. But start with something that's cross-platform by default to save yourself the hassle of your agent starts blowing up, it's getting a lot of usage, and now you have a long, complicated process to port it to another platform. Um, so I think one of the things that's relevant as it relates to Flutter is the agent is the new interface. And what does that mean for your company? As from the board down, what's happening now is boards are asking executive management teams to come up with an AI strategy. And if they don't have an AI strategy, the board doesn't have confidence in them anymore. And so that's ultimately getting pushed down to the development teams. And one of the first things you'll see is that it really causes a reduction in the amount of traditional user interface that you see. If you compare, say, more content is being generated with ChatGPT these days than just about anything else. But if you look at the interface of ChatGPT compared to the traditional, like how did people do it before, Google Docs, where are all the toolbars? They're not there. Because what happens is your interface gets reduced to your starting point is a text box, a chat thread, or a voice agent UI, and that's it. There is no other interface. And so I think that's definitely going to impact Flutter UI development teams. And so the more you can figure out, if the agent is the new interface, how do I figure out how to build that kind of interface? Whether or not Flutter is a part of it, that is the new interface. I think another thing that is that we've kind of learned from experience is that the LLM is your framework. You'll see a lot of TikTok influencers talking about the latest and greatest. Maybe they're talking about Crew AI. Maybe they're talking about LangChain. But the reality is that these things are just wrappers around for loops. And in many cases, like if you see someone that's heavily invested in something like LangChain, it's usually only a matter of time till they regret it and they want to pull it out. So I think especially in the early phase that we're in now, the thing to keep in mind is that you probably should be going direct to the LLM and not having a lot of layers between you and the LLM. Because those frameworks, the reality is the primitives are just not right. We don't use them. If you look at the kind of the agents that people actually use that get shipped into productions, they most of the time do not use agent frameworks. They just code directly against the LLM. One of the things I think that a lot of agent frameworks get wrong is they'll do something like they'll give you an agent class. And this idea that you can just extend the agent and the agent is going to do something for you. And, when I talk to a lot of customers and people, they almost have this kind of like mystical reverence for that agent framework, as if the agent framework is providing the smarts. And really, none of them are providing the smarts. The smarts is always coming from the LLM. And I think it would be useful for people to think more in terms of event loops, which of course, being UI developers, probably everyone here is familiar with the concept of an event loop, where something happens in the system, you get a message, you process that message, and maybe you kind of put something else back on the event loop. And that's the reality of how agents work. You have the LLM functioning kind of like the operating system. You pass the LLM a message. The LLM passes you a message that does something like say, hey, would you call this tool? And here's the parameters to pass to it. And you do that, and then you just return the response. And if you can think more in terms of event loops, you're not going to need some, mystical agent framework to do this stuff for you. You just process the message, you continue on, and you build the for loop yourself. And I think that's really important because what you will find is that, especially as it relates to Flutter, there's almost no agent frameworks that are built on Flutter. They're almost all written in other languages, and really, you don't need them. So don't think that you have to stop using Dart or you have to stop using Flutter just to build agents because your favorite agent framework like Crew AI doesn't exist. Just don't use it. Just hit the LLM directly. Another thing I think that's important is you do need a server. I think this is just the reality. Whether that server is running Dart or whether that server is running something like Python, you do need a server. Like a lot of people, you'll see these demos where it's all single process, it's running in the mobile app. But the reality is you can't do that. Whether it's, at a basic level, you can't give people your OpenAI key, so you at least need a proxy. And the reality is that's usually not enough because at some point you want the ability to deploy new versions of your agent. You want the ability to collect metrics. You want the ability to have observability, and you're not going to do that in your freaking mobile app. So I think it is important from day one to be thinking not in terms of the entire agent's going to be running in my mobile app or the entire agent's going to be running on my desktop. It's going to be running on a server somewhere. Something to keep in mind. Another thing is agents are stateful, and combined with the previous fact that you're probably going to have a server, this does create some friction because most people have been traditionally taught, well, we need to build these stateless web backends, but agents aren't stateless. Like one of the basic problems you would see is like with our computer use agent, every few seconds it's sending a big ping across the wire. And that's just what OpenAI requires for the data. And so imagine you're in this situation where, if you've ever worked with OpenAI directly, maybe what you do is you pass an array of messages every single time. Well, OpenAI figured out that doesn't actually work that well for more sophisticated agents with vision, because what ends up happening is that payload is maybe increasing by like 5 megs every few seconds. And so the amount of time it takes to upload keeps drastically increasing. So you're burning bandwidth. And if you're on something like a mobile device, good luck. So OpenAI had to actually completely redesign their API, get rid of the completions API, and give a new responses API so that you don't have to send that entire array every time because it's just not workable. You see, the guys behind MCP didn't realize this. They shipped a protocol and they had to, within 2 months, they had to rev the whole freaking protocol because it turned out it didn't actually work in production because they didn't think of the fact that like when you actually deploy these systems and you start scaling them out, you have thousands of servers and the workload is stateful. So that request needs to get back from the client to that same server every time. And they were missing basic headers so that even if you had the ability to write your own routers and you were relatively low level, you could do it. Keep that in mind as you are building these agent services and they are running on a server somewhere. You do have to make sure that when you have more than one server, you have like 2 or 3 servers, that you can kind of continually get back to the same server. Now, we happen to use WebSockets for this. There's a lot of ways you could do it, but WebSockets are nice because you can kind of get pinned to a specific server for the duration of your session. Another thing, I know like MCP is kind of the hype, but MCP isn't going to cut it. That's just the reality. MCP is a framework for building HTTP servers and building standard IO servers. So let's say you're in a mobile app. Let's say you're in a web app. You're not going to run an HTTP server inside the browser, and you're not going to run a standard IO process inside the browser. So, you have a very basic problem that, let's say you're going to build Hello World. Your very first task is your agent's running on a server, and you want to display a dialogue in the user interface. Well, how do you do it? MCP is one way. You know, there's a similar problem with Google. Google has a framework called A to A, or a protocol called A to A. They're saying, well, this is the way that agents communicate, but it also sucks. It doesn't solve these problems. You can't even do a hello world dialogue in your app. So this goes back to this stateful nature. For us, the way we've solved this problem is by building a totally custom protocol on top of WebSockets. And WebSockets are bidirectional. So the nice thing is when you build a tool, and that tool does need to, navigate the user in the app, or that tool needs to have access to local resources on the device, you have a way to send a message back. There is a protocol people are talking about called AGUI. Well, it doesn't support Flutter and doesn't support Dart. So you might hear a lot about all these kind of like agent protocols. They all suck, and they're in practice. They might be good if you're a TikToker and just trying to create like AI influencer videos. But you'll find in the real world, they don't really solve the problems that you need to be solved. Another point, I think Dart is probably not going to be all you need. That's just reality. Now, I'm working on porting all of OpenAI's API to Dart, and that's going to solve some of the problems. But the reality is, let's say you want to do something you want to build a voice bot. You can build the UI in Flutter. It's great. Flutter WebRTC is an awesome library. You can't do the frame processing in Dart. So you're going to need something else. And I think you're in a very real situation today that as you build out these AI applications, if you choose to write 100% of your solution in Dart, you are going to have to build the entire ecosystem and your agent. So for a lot of people, if you're concerned about, your ability to ship in production, your ability for the thing to actually work, you probably do need to be considering, what am I going to be using on the server side? Is it going to be Dart, or is it going to be something like Python? From experience, I could tell you that like Python is AI. And, if you want to do something simple, like let's say you want to process the content of a Word doc, or you want to process the content of a PDF, you can go pull a off-the-shelf library for Python. You're not going to find stuff like that on PubDev. So maybe you want to build it, go have fun. But, if you want to hit the ground running, it's probably best to, leverage Flutter for what it's good at. Leverage it for the user interface. It will really accelerate you there. But, on the server side, maybe look at other options. So if you have any questions, follow me on X, or come to the OpenAI or the AI roundtable with me and Chris Sells, and I can dig more into, specifically what does the code look like? How do we, what are the low level details of how we solve these problems, or any questions you have about, how do I go about building agents? How do I go about scaling agents? How do I go about monitoring? How do I go about making them better? Thank you.